Gervonta Davis is one of the most talented boxers in the lighter weight classes. He has more one-punch knockout power than Ryan Garcia. I'd argue he has better footwork and general ring IQ than Devin Haney, and his style is super entertaining to watch. Although Tank Davis is an incredible talent, he is also one of the biggest examples of wasted potential in the sport. I think Tank can beat every single lightweight on the planet, but due to various reasons, he has not proved that he is the very best by fighting the rest. Tank has come out recently and said he was mismanaged by Floyd Mayweather and his promotional company, and yeah, I can see that. Gervonta Davis has an undefeated winning record of 30 wins, but he's maybe fought 5 decent names: Isaac Cruz, Mario Barrios, Rolly Romero, Ryan Garcia, and most recently, Frank Martin. These are all pretty solid boxers, but they aren't the elite level guys that Tank should be fighting at the moment. Especially if you consider his extensive amateur background and how he's been a pro for 11 years now. Putting aside his issues with Mayweather Promotions, Gervonta doesn't seem overly concerned with legacy or fighting the biggest and best names he can. It seems like his main focus is the money, and he's a prize fighter first and foremost. I mean, he's held onto that WBA title for so long just defending it against fairly standard opposition, and he was still pulling in tens of millions of dollars in revenue. In his mind, if he doesn't need to fight the top boxers in his division and still can make an incredible living for himself, why would he want to put himself at risk? I understand this thought process completely, to be honest, even though I do want him to go head to head against the Shakur Stevensons and Teofimo Lopez's. I'm aware that he won against Ryan Garcia, and by extension, Ryan beat Devin Haney, but boxing maths doesn't add up and styles truly make fights. Tank's promotional team have recently said that they are trying to set up a match between him and Lomachenko, and that would be a massive step in the right direction. He also beat Frank Martin over the weekend. It was a classic Gervonta Davis performance, and while Frank fought well for a few rounds, Tank was on another level. Frank Martin is a very athletic guy who is a pretty damn good all-around boxer. I don't see anything he does exceptionally well, but he's decent. He was number 5 in the world on most boxing lightweight lists, and he hadn't lost until now as well. Tank and Frank, which is so fun to say, also had some history which I find fascinating. They sparred each other in the Mayweather gym when Tank was still his protege. However, just like what Triple D proved when he fought Filip Hrgovic recently, people change, and sparring isn't everything. Tank also made it very clear as to who was the better boxer now between him and Frank Martin. Early into the fight, Frank started out landing hooks to the body and also dealing out some decent feints. Gervonta maintained a high guard in these opening rounds, not firing much of anything of his own. That being said, he was walking forward and keeping Frank on his toes. Even though he didn't win the round, Tank was downloading the data he needed for later on in the fight. Round 2 started and Frank was increasing his output. He landed some solid combinations, but nothing seemed to get Tank's respect. I mean, when Tank started firing back with his own body shots, they sounded way more devastating by comparison. The power difference was clear from the jump, even though Frank is a strong, athletic guy. As the fight goes on, Gervonta finds more and more openings to capitalize on, and then Frank starts to fade. Frank was leaning against the ropes and trying to deflect shots on the gloves, but that strategy didn't work. Gervonta is just going to use you on the ropes to rip punches to the body and absolutely pin you down. When we got into the later rounds, Gervonta lowered his hands and just looked more comfortable in the ring than Frank. Gervonta started boxing at like 5 years old, whereas Frank Martin got into the sport way later, and that was very evident in this fight. So the fight was back and forth for the first couple of rounds, but then it culminated into a standard Tank Davis knockout. Don't get me wrong, it was a valiant effort by Frank Martin. He outworked Tank early on, he outboxed him in spots, took a couple of rounds off Tank, landed some great looking combinations, but then Gervonta Davis did what Gervonta Davis always does to his opponents: finishes them. I really want to like Tank Davis and be excited for his fights, but there's something missing. I haven't been too high on Tank because he has all the talent in the world, but his resume has been lackluster until very recently. Gervonta Davis has an extremely exciting style, but if he's just knocking out guys without any danger or jeopardy, his fights become one note. That's why one of my favorite fights of his is Tank vs Jose Pedraza. It was a competitive match for a lot of the fight, but then he landed the knockout after some actual adversity. Pedraza was bullying the smaller man, and while Tank didn't look that hurt, he did need to wait out the storm until Pedraza gassed. So Tank's style is fun to watch, and on the whole, his game is near perfect. He ticks all the boxes for me. He has superb head movement and footwork, he has those Mayweather-level defensive skills, he ties opponents up exactly when he needs to, the way he counters with that left hook, and Tank's power is exactly like a tank. His knockout ratio speaks for itself. Even though I understand why he wants to go and make money fights with lesser boxers, I would really love to see his style versus Lomachenko, George Kambosos, Shakur Stevenson, all of these champions and contenders before he gets out of his prime. When critics have said that boxing is bad because the best don't fight the best in the world and they're all making easy paydays fighting journeymen, Gervonta Davis has been the #1 example of this. Fans have discussed Tank being in the pound for pound debate after his knockout win over the weekend. I understand the arguments about putting him in the mix, but he has no real accomplishments other than passing the eye test. I think Gervonta Davis beats every single lightweight and junior welterweight, but what ifs don't mean anything in the pound for pound conversation. He needs to beat these guys first. Tank took some time out of the ring before the Frank Martin fight to serve jail time and house arrest. Could this have possibly altered Tank's mindset when looking at the types of opponents he wants to fight? Did he evaluate his legacy in boxing after going through such a rough patch in his life? Probably not, to be honest. Gervonta Davis doesn't strike me as a very reflective guy, but if his team is serious about fighting Lomachenko and other lightweights next, then the question marks surrounding Tank's career might start evaporating in the coming years.